Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. In a previous program, I asked a question. In fact, I posed hard questions for creationists. We must academically face the issues, face the music like it is. Now, in the interest of fair play, I think we should have a program on hard questions for evolutionists. In the past, I was an evolutionist. I certainly am not any longer. How do we explain, and we must address the questions related to the entire biota, the microbial context, the microbes, the plankton, the bacteria, all involved in the life processes, living systems themselves, the interplay of the tides, the stellar bodies, in fact, the entire universal support system behind planet Earth. How do we explain that? And can we address the questions? In fact, an evolutionist who holds to a naturalistic interpretation must answer certain questions. We're going to pose those questions on the program today. As stated before, and a number of times on this program, there are only two alternatives to life origins. The four great questions of life are, who am I? Where did I come from? Life origins. What's my purpose here? And where am I going? To answer these questions, and especially life origins, there's only the naturalistic explanation we call evolution, or the supernatural explanation, and it is scientific in nature. So let's examine these scientifically, creation versus evolution. But hard questions for evolutionists is the title of today's program. Now, when we talk about evolution, we have to define terms. Normally, the evolutionist will fudge. I know, I used to be in the camp. They will take evidence for microevolution, variation within genetic boundaries, horizontal shuffling of the genetic material, and apply that to macroevolution, change, genetic alteration, accumulation of new genetic information beyond the horizontal plane to provide supposed evidence for evolution in a progressive sense. Horizontal reshuffling of the data provide no problem whatsoever. Microevolution is seen on every hand. Variation, even speciation, but all within a limited gene pool. Now, when we limit that appreciably, we get an inferior product. In fact, anytime we reshuffle it, we get an inferior product and an inferior life form. But the evolutionist normally uses evidence for micro exchange of information to produce macroevolution. Scientifically, that's impossible. So let's ask some hard questions of the evolutionist. First of all, what about the complexity of living systems? Let's just start with the proteins of a single cell. Now, according to evolutionary theory, we have about 20 billion years of universal history to produce the living systems we see today, according to that theory. So for the moment, let's grant these 20 billion years of evolutionary time to the evolutionist. Let's grant it, those 20 billion years, to assemble a single protein. Now wait a minute. It's not a single protein in view. A functional cell must have all of the system intact. Otherwise, in a matter of minutes, it begins to biodegrade and dies. A functional cell has about 60,000 proteins and 100 different configurations. Each of these proteins is very specific. It's a species of its own. Wow. But let's go back to the evolutionary claim. Let's grant 20 billion years to produce a single protein. In 20 billion years, you have 20 billion times 365 days times 24 hours times 60 minutes times 60 seconds, giving 630, 720, 000, 000, 000, 000 seconds in 20 billion years. All right. To assemble one short protein through random, undirected shuffling, we need to make the following calculations. 1, 0, 0, 0, comma, 0, 0, all of these zeros divided by 630, comma, 720, the figure up here, seconds in 20 billion years. That equals, watch closely, 1.585489599 229 325 215 626 585 4896 times 10 to the 243rd power random changes per second to achieve the correct order in less than 20 billion years. Rounded off, it is written like this: 15, 854, 0, triple zero, zero, zeros, all of these zeros, random shuffles per second for 20 billion years to produce one single protein. Scientifically impossible. Yet you have to add the 60,000 specific proteins in 100 different configurations to get a single functioning cell. Hard questions for evolutionists when you put the math to it, put the science to it. But let's go beyond that. Let's ask another question of the evolutionists. What about the geologic column? The geologic column is the Bible of evolutionary theory. It's called technically the paradigm. It's the model. It's the profile of evolutionary theory. And according to this theory, about 3.5 billion years ago, early bacteria evolved. And then about 530 million years ago, you have certain trilobites and jellyfish and other living systems. And the evolution goes on and on until ultimately you reach man. But wait a minute. This geologic column is not found anywhere on the face of planet Earth, except in the mind of the evolutionist and in the schematic diagrams of the textbook. It's not found on planet Earth. Quite often, you have rocks, sedimentary deposit, assigned a certain age, again, assigned a certain age. You have rocks assigned a certain age, inverted or embedded deep within the earth in a completely topsy-turvy sequence to what you would expect if you have evolutionary progression. The geologic column is not a scientific statement of fact. It is a philosophic, religious statement of the mindset of the evolutionist. What about this column? Watch this very closely. In this column, we have a sedimentary layer. Here it's illustrated in the nation of Israel. This sedimentary layer is found worldwide. It's called the Austin chalk, not because it's soft like chalk, but because it's white like chalk. Here's one of our geologists, Dr. Don Patton, standing before this layer in Israel. This layer was first identified near Austin, Texas. Therefore, it's called the Austin chalk, but it runs westward throughout the continental United States, runs eastward 1,600 miles from Austin to the eastern seaboard of the United States, picks up again at the White Cliffs of Dover, runs throughout Europe, runs throughout Russia, throughout the Orient, runs throughout Israel, runs throughout Africa. From the United States, picks up from Texas, runs north throughout Canada, runs south throughout Mexico and South America. It's on the continent of Australia. It is a global deposit. Evolutionist friend of mine, in sympathy and compassion, I ask, what do you do about this layer of sedimentary deposit? To have a sedimentary deposit, you must have a water-borne medium. We're talking about a worldwide flood. It cannot be ignored. It's not simply found in local areas, it's found in those areas plus all other areas contiguous. What do you do about that layer in the geologic column? What that means is this geologic column was laid down essentially in a year of progressive sedimentary deposit. How do you know it was a year of progressive sedimentary deposit? Professor M.E. Clark and Dr. Henry Voss of the University of Illinois have used a very sophisticated computer program, and they have found that on a global body of water with material suspended in that water, the effect of the moon on the tides bringing that water into resonance would lay down a separate sedimentary deposit every 12 hours worldwide. Every 12 hours. And that's a scientific study. So we're not talking about 3.5 billion years from bacteria to man. We are talking about a systematic layering during a global flood that occurred just a few thousand years ago. Now let me give you another bit of evidence. Let me ask you another question. What about the polystrate fossils in that column? Among those polystrate? If you look in the geology books, it's hard to find the term polystrate, but if you look in the geology of the field worldwide, you'll find that polystrate fossils are rather common. They're the rule. What's a polystrate fossil? Poly means many. Straight has to do with layer, many layers, or at least multiple layers. In other words, a fossil that extends from one layer up through the next layer, and often through 15 or 20 layers. There is a fossilized tree near Cookeville, Tennessee, featured in National Geographic some years ago. The base of that tree, with everything stripped off except the knob of the root system and the trunk. The knob of the root system is in coal, and it's coalified. The trunk extends up to sandstone through more coal, and it's coalified at that point. It's sandstone in between. Through more limestone and then coal. Limestone, sandstone, covering what has been assigned in this geologic column over 5 million years of time. My evolutionist friend, what do you do with that? What that really shows is not that that tree remained 5 million years in place as the sediment slowly formed over it, but that tree was in place for just a matter of days or weeks as the progressive development, accumulation of sediments occurred during that global flood. And we've seen academically there was a global flood because we have a global sedimentary layer worldwide. It's called the Austin Chalk. Incredible information that must be addressed. Now, in this geologic column, let me ask you another question. What about the fossil men? In this column, worldwide, academically, we've adopted a profile that suggests that some 12 to 14 million years ago, early primates proliferated, and then about 2.5 million years ago, dawn man appeared. And from those early primates, the orangutans, the chimpanzees, the gorillas in general, ultimately you have man produced. But wait a minute, Dr. Richard Leakey, recognized worldwide in his time as the leading paleoanthropologist, before his death admitted that he found remains of totally modern human beings in the sediment among the earliest hominids that he had interpreted as being developing to human beings, but instead they were pungid. That is, they were of the monkey classification, chimpanzee, orangutan. So, in other words, all of the information supporting the development of lower primates to higher primates is wiped out. What about that information? These are hard questions that evolutionists must answer. Then, let me pose another hard question. What about the soft tissue found in dinosaur bones? T-Rex, supposedly disappeared 64 million years ago. And the dinosaur bone in question, a number have been found, but the first one was discovered in what was assigned 70 million year old deposit. When they accidentally broke the dinosaur, the T-Rex bone, they found soft tissue. Soft tissue. Here's a photograph of that work. Soft tissue, even blood vessels, intact, totally flexible, and after being air dried, it became slightly less pliable. According to all calculations, all the DNA should have disappeared long before 10,000 years have passed. And all the flexibility should have disappeared long before that. What do you do about the soft tissue and the blood vessels found? Let me ask you another question. What do you do about the scientific relation to your posit of star formation to reality? How do you explain star formation? Let me explain what I'm talking about. According to evolutionary theory, stars continue to form. And according to astronomers, there's an estimate that there are about 100 billion galaxies. They estimate about 200 billion stars per galaxy. Now, put another way, that is saying that there are about 225 billion galaxies, each with 500 million stars, but the math turns out to be approximately the same either way. So let's use these calculations. Astronomers estimating there are about 100 billion galaxies, each comprised of about 200 billion stars. Astronomers claim the universe, that is, most astronomers, secular astronomers, most claim the universe is about 20 billion years old. That's 6.3 times 10 to the 17th power of seconds. Now let's do the math. Grant 20 billion years. Let's do the math. 100 billion galaxies times 200 billion stars each equals 2 times 10 to the 22nd power. Dividing by 6.3 times 10 to the 17th seconds equals 3.746 times 10 to the 4th, or 31,746 stars per second would have to be formed throughout the 20 billion years. We have never observed even one star form, but we have seen them die. Now, just casually, in Genesis 1:26, the scripture states, God made the stars also. It's all in a moment's reflection because He is omnipotent. Evolutionist friend of mine, what about star formation? Have you ever done the math before? It's impossible for the math to work in 20 billion years to get all of these stars and in place and perfectly synchronized with the gravity of planet Earth to support life. There are over 50 conditions called the anthropic principle that must be satisfied. All of this must be in place or it doesn't work. If you form a new star and a new star and a new star, that affects the gravitational attraction. The entire system, like the cell that we talked about earlier. That cell with 60,000 proteins and 100 different configurations must be all intact in place, and all of those stars essentially must be intact in place for the system to function for these 50 constants. These constants are like the mass of the electron compared to the mass of the proton. If the mass of the proton were slightly greater or slightly less, even by a decimal point, the entire universe would collapse. And that is not an overstatement. That is in the technical literature. If the mass of the proton were slightly greater or slightly less, its life would be, and it's necessary for the stability of all the atoms and the elements universally, its life would be a matter of minutes. 8 minutes is what's found in some of the technical references. In other words, if that mass of the proton were not specifically what it is, and in relation to the rest of the universe, simultaneously, the universe would collapse in 8 minutes. It all must be in place simultaneously. Now, these are hard questions for evolutionists to answer. Now, let's go to some other questions. What about dinosaurs found in recent human history? Not long ago, I was in Israel at Sippori at the 3rd century mansion, 4th century, 300 AD, and one of our photographers took this photograph of a man with a huge boulder attempting to kill a ceratosaurid dinosaur in order to so faithfully represent him with the horns, with the slight dermal frills, with the crest, with the subsurface material of the jaw, all consistent with the latest paleontological discoveries. In order to so faithfully represent him, they would have to see that creature. How do you explain this? These are hard questions. Then let me ask another question. This is a hard question. What do you do with the human mind? The complexity of the human mind. Not only the brain, the mind. Many researchers of the function of the mind realize that it's not just the brain, but it's the mind behind it that assimilates information. Did you get that? What do you do with all of that? The brain is incredible. From a laboratory, an astronomer can measure the distance to the farthest star, weigh the mass of the universe, and interpret the signals found throughout the cosmos, all without leaving his laboratory. The mind of man is incredible. We have in the brain, according to the recent calculations, over 100 billion cells. Each of those cells has an average of 50,000 neuron connections to other cells. You're incredibly complicated, fearfully and wonderfully made. Every second of your life, my evolutionist friend, your brain receives, processes, and transmits over 100 million signals from the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, to the autonomic nervous system. Your brain, with your mind and brain, technical references indicate we're able to perceive problems, work out solutions, determine a course of action, and follow that course of action, all without ever realizing consciously that we were working on the problem at all. You are awesome. How do you explain the brain and the mind? In fact, the brain functions incredible calculations simultaneously. According to an English university study, the order of letters in a word doesn't matter. The only thing that's important is that the first and last letter of every word is in the correct position. The rest can be jumbled and one is still able to read the text without difficulty. Your brain is functioning as a marvelous computer. My evolutionist friend, what do you do about the human footprints found in rock? This particular rock is Permian, assigned an age of 225 to 256 million years in age. There were 9 of these prints altogether. This would be consistent with a worldwide flood, but totally inconsistent with evolutionary theory. What do you do about those prints? Let me ask you another question. What do you do about the evolutionary scholars jumping ship? For instance, we have Dr. Philip Schall, the Evan Pugh Professor of Chemistry, Pennsylvania State University, in this list. Individuals who believed and taught evolutionary theory in the past, but individuals who now say, wait a minute, it's bankrupt. Scientifically, it can't stand up. But you say, well, that's just one little page of scholars who have jumped ship. Oh, really? In this one listing alone, there were over 500 names, their positions. And the list goes on and on. Every month, more are added. I'm saying, what do you do about your colleagues who are recognizing the truth? Finally, what do you do about the appearance of the Creator in human flesh? His name is Jesus Christ. In the Old Testament, there are over 300 prophecies relating. Dr. Peter Stoner calculated these as specialist in the science of probability. Over 300 prophecies relating to the appearance of Jesus Christ in His first advent. Take just 30 of these. They're so obvious, they include the town where He was to be born, the people. They include how He was to die. They include His resurrection. The probability that one man could fulfill those in history, these prophecies in history, is one chance in 10 to the 157th power. I'm talking to you scientifically. That brings us to this conclusion. What will you now do with Jesus? He died for you. He arose from the dead. Would you pray this simple prayer? Pray it with me now. Dear God, I've been wrong. I'm a sinner. And I want Jesus Christ in my heart. Lord Jesus, right now, I open my heart to you. Come in and save me. I will serve you with all my heart. If you prayed that simple prayer, welcome home.
Creation in the 21st Century has been sponsored by Trinity Broadcasting Network, and only with your love gift of support can this program stay on the air. So write to Creation in the 21st Century, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.
Information like you've received today is available at the Creation Evidence Museum. In printed form, in videos, we even have a coloring book for the kids. Just call or write us at Creation Evidence Museum, P.O. Box 309, Glen Rose, Texas, 76043, area code 254-897-3200, or check us out on the web, creationevidence.com.